welcome everyone to Command Line Fundamentals. This is going to be a class teaching you how to use the terminal, specifically the Linux terminal, in order to connect to other servers and to work more efficiently on your own machine. So this is run by MIT's Computer Club SIPB, the Student Information Processing Board. I'm Anthony, this is Hui and Javier, and we're going to be co-teaching this class for the next 2 days. And we're thrilled to have all of you with us.
Also, just to note, this is a rather small class. Feel free to just raise your hand or ask us if you have questions, like on the spot.
Yeah. Oh, and then for everybody on Zoom, I think if possible, if you can have like your question in the chat, and then we'll raise our hand and make sure it gets asked in the class. Okay, we get started.
Okay. So, why do we need to use the terminal? A primary motivation for this is that your laptop has something, a good modern laptop can do about 100 billion operations per second, so that's 10 to the 11. This is a picture of the Aurora supercomputer that's being built at Argonne National Lab, and this will be able to do 1 exaflop of computing, which is 10 to the 18 operations per second. And so it's 10 million times more powerful than a typical laptop. But if you want to connect to a machine like this, the only interface that it gives you, or it gives accessible to the public, is the terminal. And so you need to be able to understand the terminal if you want to interface with this and run your code 10 million times faster than your laptop can handle.
Anthony, can you speak a little bit louder?
Okay. And so another motivation for this is that a few classes in Course 6 and elsewhere will require terminals to use, and various careers will use it. But then, even if you're just running on your own machine, this is a useful set of skills because you can automate processes and run things, especially repetitive processes, a lot more quickly once you get the hang of this than clicking and dragging in folders. So, we're going to be talking basically about the terminal and about SSH. And so SSH is the program that you use to connect to these machines like the Aurora supercomputer. And what it gives you is a connection between your machine, basically a terminal on your machine, which is a place where you can enter text commands and receive text output, and a terminal on the global machine, the server that you're connecting to. If you've ever connected a Windows machine to another Windows machine, you probably use Windows Remote Desktop, which gives you kind of a graphical interface. But if you want to connect to a machine that's not Windows, basically your only option will be this text-based terminal. And so if you have access to computers like Aurora, then you could use that. But MIT also provides us these servers that are accessible to the entire community that are called the Athena dial-up servers. And you can access them online at athena.dialup.mit.edu, and we'll also show you how to connect to them with SSH from a terminal on your own machine. So the first command that we're going to teach you is the SSH command, because you're going to need that in order to run all subsequent commands on these, I guess I'm going to say, faraway machines that are not local. So the SSH command, in a second I'll show you where to type this, but you type SSH and then your username on the server, the @ sign, and then the name of the server. And so my username is AGREBE, so I would type that at athena.dialup.mit.edu. And then it'll ask you for your password and 2-factor authentication, and then you'll be connected to this other machine in some faraway server and essentially be controlling it almost as you would with like Windows Remote Desktop. I'm going to be running all of this on a Linux machine, and so I just want to show you what Windows looks like before I show it to you on Linux. So if you have a Windows machine, I'll walk through Mac and Linux in a second. The way that you connect to SSH is you open up Windows PowerShell, so you can just search for that in the toolbar, and then just type in SSH, your username at athena.dialup.mit.edu. If you have a modern version of Windows like Windows 10. Back when I was learning this 5 years ago on Windows 7, it was much harder, but Windows 10, you can just use PowerShell. And then I'm going to show you how this works on Linux and Mac. So this is my Linux machine. Macs are very, very similar to Linux under the hood, so you can more or less follow along. And so I'm going to type in SSH Agreeby is my username at athena.dialup.mit.edu. And if you want to, you can follow along at this point with your own username here. And then it's going to ask me for two-factor, it'll probably ask you for a password, and then for two-factor authentication, which I will give it. And then it gives me basically a prompt for asking for some input. And so I have control over another computer, but I have to know how to talk to it. And so usually you won't have any sort of graphical support, but because this is for pedagogical reasons, I'm going to pull up what this folder looks like on the remote machine, and that's going to be on the right here. And so we want to try to figure out, so if I had access to this GUI, the graphical user interface, I could just say, like, open this file to see what's in it. Or I could click on this folder to enter it. And we want to know how to basically do these same commands in the terminal. So the first thing that this GUI tells you is what files are in this folder, just kind of for free. You don't even have to do anything, you just look. And so the equivalent of this in the terminal is the command ls, which stands for list. And so if I type ls, it will list all the files and folders in this directory here. So just a technical term, directory is the Linux term for a folder. So I'll use directory and folder interchangeably. So if you're on Ubuntu, and I think most computers, folders will show up as blue and ordinary files will show up as white. And so that's how you can distinguish between them. The other important command for navigation is cd. So cd stands for change directory. And so maybe I want to go into this public folder. And so I would type cd public. And now you can see at the bottom of my screen here that now it shows you I have changed to the public folder. And this is the equivalent of just clicking on the folder. And so if I want to list what's in this public folder, I can just type ls again. And now I've prepared some stuff in this intro terminal folder, and so we're going to navigate into that directory as well. And so that's the equivalent of going here. And again, so in an actual folder, you sometimes want to navigate upwards as well. So maybe I didn't want to go into this folder, maybe I went into the wrong folder. And so I want to change directory up one level. And so there's a couple special directories on Linux. There's a directory called a single dot, which is the current directory. And so if I type this command, it will change from the current directory into the current directory, which will basically do nothing. Now there's a double dot, which is go up one level. And so if I type cd ... then I will go up one level in the directory structure, which will bring me back to this public directory. There's also the home directory, which is where we started. So when you log into a server, you always start in your home directory. If you log out and log back in again, then you'll get bumped back to this home directory. And you can switch to that by doing cd twiddle, or tilde, and this brings you back to the home directory. You can also change multiple directories at once by giving a full path. So right now we've only done one directory at a time, but I could type cd public / intro terminal, and then I switch into the public directory and into the intro terminal with one command. And so that brings me into here. And so now I want to go into this demo day 1 directory. Demo day 1. And it tells me there's a bunch of files here. Okay. So there's one last command for kind of finding your way around a terminal, and that's the print working directory command, pwd, pwd, which gives you the full file path to the directory that you're in right now. And so we kind of started in the home directory, but the home directory is in a bunch of system folders. So if you were on Windows, it would be in the equivalent of like c:/Windows/users/your username folder. And on Linux, it gives us starting with the system path, and then the directories we changed into public, intro terminal, demo day one. Okay. So are there any questions about just kind of looking around at what files you have access to? Yeah.
What was ls again?
So ls is list the contents of the directory. Okay. So in addition to looking around, we might want to move files around. And so maybe I want to make a copy of this draft one of an essay. Maybe I want to say that I'm going to have a second draft of this essay so that I can edit the second draft and save the original. So I can use the cp command, which means copy. So I want to copy essay draft1.txt into essay draft2.txt. And if I refresh this GUI, or this graphical user interface, I now have two copies of this that are identical. And if I edit the second draft of this essay and save that, then I have a first and a second draft. You can also copy a file into a folder. And so maybe I want to create a copy of this essay day one in this directory dir. So I can also type essay draft1.txt into the subfolder dir. And then if I go into this directory, I have a copy of draft one of the essay there. So I want to give you a word of warning about copying. That if you in Microsoft Windows, and I think even in Mac or in most graphical interfaces, if I try to overwrite something while copying it, I'll get some warning, like warning you're about to overwrite this file. Do you want to proceed? And in Linux, at least inside the terminal, it does not give you these warnings. And so if I, say, have this thesis that I've already worked really hard on, and I accidentally type cp essay draft1.txt into thesis.txt, it does not give me any warning. It just overwrites my thesis with draft one of this essay. And so it's always a good idea to run ls and to make sure that you're looking at what files you have before you run any sort of copy operation, to make sure that you're not overwriting things. So in addition to copying, there's also moving. And moving is quite similar in that it's essentially the same as copy, except it does not leave the original behind. And so maybe I want to move essay draft 2 into this directory. And then if I refresh here, essay draft 2 is gone from this folder, and it's inside the directory that I moved it to. You can also use move to rename files, because if I move something from an old name to a new name within the same directory, that's equivalent to just changing the name of the file. And so maybe I want to rename my thesis. So I'm going to move thesis.txt to, let's say, dissertation.txt. And now it's the same file, it's just changed its name. And so this is, so move, in addition to actually moving files between folders, is also the rename function inside your terminal. So are there any questions either from in-person or Zoom on copying or renaming or moving? Yeah?
Instead of the directory, could you give a file path to move like a file into a directory that's not like in the ASMD vicinity?
Yes. So you can give file paths that are absolute file paths that, so for example, start with this slash, which gives you access to your entire system, and you can also kind of chain ... to keep moving up a couple levels in the directory structure. So for example, if I want to move this dissertation to my home directory, I could do mv dissertation.txt into my home directory, and then maybe in the pictures folder of my home directory. And now it's gone from this folder, and if I walk all the way up to my home directory and go in the pictures folder, now the dissertation is there. Very good question. Okay. You can also move multiple files at once into a directory, or copy multiple files into a directory. Like maybe I want to copy essay draft 1 and Hamlet into this directory. I could do copy essay draft1.txt and hamlet.txt into dir. If you're copying into a directory, you can give any number of paths into the directory. Oops, I misspelled essay draft 1. If you want to copy an entire directory, you use the -r, you do cp-r. So this -r is called a flag, and what the R stands for recursive, and so this means copy the directory and everything in the directory. So for example, I might copy this from dir into new dir, and then I have made a copy of the folder, and the contents of this folder are the same as the contents of the original folder. And then there's another big operation that sometimes you want to do, and that's deleting files. Now, I said with copy and move that Linux does not prompt you for any warning. It does not give you any warning if you're overwriting things. And it's the same for deleting. So you delete with rm. So maybe I want to delete draft 1 of my essay, because now I'm on to draft 2. I can do rm essay draft1.txt. And now this is gone. It's not in some trash folder or anything, or in any sort of recycling bin where you can undo your actions. It's been said that rm is forever. And so if I rm my Bitcoin key, now I've lost all my Bitcoin. In theory, like, professionals can get this back by disassembling your hard drive and running it through a magnetic force microscope or something, but within the Linux system, there's basically no way to get files back after you delete them. And so I don't want to scare you away, but just be very careful when you're running rm. Always look at the file that you're deleting before you delete it, and make sure that it's actually trash and you don't want it. If you want to delete an entire directory, you also use this -r for recursive. And so if I don't want new dir anymore, because it's just a copy of the original directory, I can do rm-r new dir. And now the whole directory is gone, and everything in it. And so I told you before that / is kind of the top-level system file on your system. And so if I have administrator privileges on the system, and there's a command sudo that gives you administrator privileges that we'll talk a little bit more about tomorrow, and then I do rm-r for recursive and f for force, where it will forcibly delete everything without warning, and then this top-level directory, I'm not going to actually run this command, because this will delete everything on your computer, including all system files. It will prompt you for the administrator password, but other than that, it will give you no warning before deleting everything. And it will crash your computer and not make it usable again until you reinstall your operating system and put all your files back on it. So rm is a very powerful command, but a little bit scary, and just be careful when you're using it. And then the last thing I want to touch on is how to create files and folders. So if you want to create a file, you can touch that file. So if I type touch new file.txt, then a new empty file will appear called this new file.txt, and it's just entirely blank. If I want to make a folder, I do mkdir for make directory. And this creates a folder that's completely empty. There's nothing in it. And then I can remove it the same way that I created it with just rm-r because it's a folder, new dir. Okay, so I know this is a fair amount of information I've thrown at you pretty quickly. So are there any questions with basic file operations? Okay. So now that we've covered a little bit about how to get around to the terminal and how to see what's there, I'm going to turn this over to, wait, Javier, you're next, right? I'm going to turn this over to Javier to talk about how to edit text files.
All right. Hey, everyone. So Anthony missed a few things, but I will briefly cover them, which is, let's say you have all these folders, right? But you want to make more. So if you want to make more folders slash directories where you currently are, you would just do make dir, and then you would put the name of the directory. So let's say we want to make a directory called like folder, and then if we refresh,
Control R.
we would have a folder called folder. And then I think that's it. Sorry. Wait, how do you scroll? Okay. And then also, talking about ls and the flags, we know how we can, if we type ls, it shows all the directories and all the files in our current directory. But let's say there are, we want to know more about it. Like, let's say we want to know like when it was created or who could control the file. So we would do ls-l, and that'll show us a little bit more information about it. So like, for example, like all these files were created on like roughly around this time, and then a timestamp of it, as well as like a few technical details about who can control it, which we'll talk about tomorrow. There's also another one called LSA, which not in the specific folder, I guess, but like in other folders, what the A flag does is show us what are called hidden flags. Hidden folders slash hidden files, which means like files that start with a dot, and they're not necessarily shown by default because they're more like system settings or something like that. So just to keep in mind. So yeah, so now we can talk about my topic, which is how to view files. So let's say we're in this folder and we want to see the Hamlet.txt. Now Hamlet's a rather large, this is like the entire Hamlet story, so it's rather large, and you don't want to like, let's say you don't want to copy it and like view it on a GUI. What you can do is type less and then Hamlet.txt. And what this would do is pop it up in the same shell you were in, but now you can scroll along by using J to go down and K to go up, or you can just use the arrow keys. And now you can just read Hamlet as you would. And then to exit the file once you're ready, you can just press Q. But now let's say you have a shorter file like hello.c, and you just want to like briefly see what it is. You would just type in cat hello.c, and now it just printed straight to the terminal. So now you don't have to worry about opening it up as if you were going to scroll, because it's just really short. So that's all you need. And then, so yeah, that's part of how to view files. And now I'm going to introduce you to like a sort of new topic, which is the actual creation of files. So let's say you want to make like a script, and you only have access to the terminal, and you don't have access to like what you normally use to make files, which is like a text editor on like Windows, which has like Notepad or something. So you can do this straight to the terminal with something called Vim. And Vim is like a powerful text editor that can be found in virtually all Unix systems. And once you get over its like kind of like long learning curve, it is very like efficient to use it over other text editors that exist. So let's say we want to make a file called Hamlet 2, because there's a sequel to Hamlet apparently. So we do vim hamlet 2.txt. Don't forget to add the actual, as Anthony was showing along, the actual the last part, the .text part, and then enter. And now you can see that there is. Just a second, I'm gonna hide this. Okay, so then we have this Vim shell, I guess, and to start editing in this. Well, first I should explain like how this works, because like Vim is like very interesting because it has multiple modes, which are insert, normal, visual, and command. And all these modes help you like sort of navigate around the file and edit stuff in the file. So the first thing to know is like how to actually add text to the file. So to do that, you would like once you're in this file, you would press I, like lowercase I, and now you're in insert mode. And when you're in insert mode, you can basically just add text as you normally would. And then to exit insert mode, or to exit like any mode in general, you would just press escape. And now you're like freely, like it's there, and now you can enter other modes. So like now that you're in escape mode, you can just move around your cursor, which is the blinking thing right there. So to move around, you would use the arrow keys, or when you're more advanced, you can use H, J, Q, K, and L. So, like, if you want to use H, J, K, and L, those are a little bit more advanced. But in theory, because they're in the same line of your keyboard, like it is kind of faster to use in the long run, because you don't have to move your hand to the actual like up and down arrows. So let's say you're done with this file. You would now enter command mode to like save it. So you would do WQ. You would first press Shift colon to get like a little colon on the bottom, and then you would press WQ, which means like I think W stands for like saving and Q stands for exiting. So now you can just exit, and now it's saved. So let's print what we have. And it's right there, hello world. But let's say we go back, and let's say we edit a bit more, and we don't want to actually save this. So what we can do is just colon Q with a exclamation point, and this will just like exit and not save. Or if you just want to save, you do W. So those are the three different modes of like file manipulation in terms of saving and closing. Other useful things to know when it comes to insert mode is, let's say you want to insert, like the way the insert mode works is like when I press I, it will actually insert after the cursor. So if I press I right now and I press like the word A, the letter A, it'll pop up after the letter D. So now, let's say you actually want to insert like before the letter D, you would just press A on your keyboard. And it'll sort of, it should appear before D. I think actually you do it like the letter before, but that's...
I is before, A is after.
Oh, sorry. I is before, A is after. Sorry. So if I press I, it'll go before L. But if I press A, it'll go after L. Yeah. So that's what to know about insert mode. Some things to know. Some other useful things to know is what's called visual mode. So what visual mode is, it lets you like select large portions of text in the file and like copy, paste, or delete them. So let's say we go to the Hamlet file we have. Whoops, sorry. And what we do to get into visual mode is press V, and now we can use our arrow keys to like select a chunk of text. And let's say we want to like select everything before Act 1, and let's say we want to copy it. We will press Y, and now it's copied, or yanked as it's called, and then press P to paste it, or what's called put. And now we have 2 copies of the same first lines of Hamlet. And now let's say we want to delete what we just did. So we would go back to visual mode, and we would select everything up to what we want to delete, and then we would press X, and now that's gone. So those are some of the basics to know about Vim. Another like things to keep track of is like if you're ever editing like an administrative file, you sometimes want to start you sometimes want to use sudo before saying Vim. So like sudo vim file, which we'll cover later tomorrow what the sudo command does. That'll let you like actually tinker with the administrative files. And there's also something that you should do in your spare time called Vim Tutor. And what Vim Tutor does is it lets you go through like a 30-minute like tutorial of how to use Vim, which is like super useful, especially when you're starting off. So I highly recommend going this when you have free time. And then I think that's about it for Vim. Are there any questions? That was a lot. So yeah.
The visual mode, how do you enter visual mode?
Oh, with the V, with pressing V, and then moving around with the arrow keys. Yeah.
Can you remind me what the less command means?
Oh yeah, so less is basically you enter a scrollable interface. So if you have a large text file, you can scroll along it with the arrow keys, and then exit with Q. So not by default, but you can like use your cursor to like copy and paste it, I guess. But you can't like use the Y and P on 2 different files. Alright, so I think we're ready to turn it to Hui.
Thanks, Javier. Hello, everybody. So for my last part, I'll be talking a little bit more about running an actual program. So let me pull up slides. Oh, and yes, just as a reminder, this PowerPoint is we have a link for it, which we'll show at the end. But yeah, so don't worry about having to copy everything down. Yeah, this part is relatively simple. So sometimes you are given something called an ELF binary, or sometimes a bash script that you need to run. And bash scripts are the equivalent of like PowerShell or a batch. They're slightly different pronunciation on Windows. And then the ELF binary is the equivalent of .exe. And so there is a security feature on Linux such that usually on Windows, right, if you give them a binary, you can just double click on it and it will run. But on Linux, you have to set essentially like a security flag that says, I've marked this file as executable. And so there's this command called cmon +x. So try to bring up the terminal. So I created this file called like date.sh. And if we cat it, right, it's just a simple bash script. I think I actually messed up a little bit. Here. Okay. And that's also a great way to use Vim. You can just go in and edit really quickly. So yeah, so with this, I would have to do cmod plus x, and then date. And what I did there also, we just wanted to mention real quick, is called something tab completion. So sometimes, in this file, right, the only file that starts with a DA is my file not named date.sh. So I type out DA, and I don't want to write out everything else. And so if you press tab on your computer, it will actually try to auto-complete that part for you. So it's an interesting thing to know. So if I do ls again, I should now see that date went from being kind of just a normal file to an executable. To actually execute it, there are two options. So you can either do /, so the current directory / the file name, or you can do sh. And this is only, the sh is only used for bash script, right? And that's mean that these are commands that you can run normally on a terminal. So for this, I can do sh date. And we'll print out the output, which is the current date that we're running this in. Same thing, I could do /, date, sh. And you get the same output. Now, there is a little bit difference between these two different commands. So // actually reads the shebang line. And so that was what you saw in the first line here. This is actually a comment in terms of bash. But what it's telling the system is that, okay, I want you to run this program using the interpreter located at this location. So for example, if I actually change this to something like, I think, user bin /python3, it's actually obviously not a Python file. But if I try to do that here, it will mess it up. It will be like, this is not a valid syntax. So, but if I, yeah. Now I have another file. So usually more common, you also need to run like a Python file, right? With Python, they're automatically installed on both Linux and Mac OS. So usually, if you want to get in just in interactive mode, you do Python 3, right? And you can do like a = 3, print a. So everything you need to do with Python normally. To exit out of interactive mode, usually with most programs you can do Control-C, but Python doesn't like that. So you do exit parentheses. Okay, so now here I also have a Python script that I want to run. So fib.py. And like I think Javier mentioned, usually it's a good idea to look at like scripts that you're running, so you know, to see if they're what it's actually doing. So I'll cat it out. That's you. So here I have the shebang file Python 3. That's actually not necessary. So if I do Python 3, Python 3, and then fib, it just prints out the first, I think, 15 or so Fibonacci numbers, and that will run the file for you. With the shebang line, if I show you that I didn't mark it as executable. So if I do fib, it says permission denied. So just so you know. So I'll do cmod + x. Right. And because of that shebang line, it knows, okay, let me run this in Python. And so that's how that works. Also, another interesting thing is the version flag. Most systems nowadays come with Python 3, but if you want to check what Python you're running, I think, does this work? Okay, so I think with the system, Python just normally is version 2, but if I do Python 3, it'll show up as Python 3. And we'll talk a little bit more about like using pip and managing like Python and Linux packages tomorrow, but it's just something to look forward to. A few last commands. So there is something called history. It is kind of useful because sometimes you type out this really long line, right? And then you're like, I don't remember what I wrote. So typing history shows you basically, I think, a very long history of all the commands that you run on the terminal. Sometimes you also maybe your terminal's filled up with too much stuff. So if you want to clear it, just do clear. And this doesn't actually affect the history, right? If I type history, sorry, it's a little bit hard to see. That actually doesn't clear that. It just clears what I see on my screen. So to wrap up, there's also stuff about getting help. So there's a lot of this, right? There's a lot of commands. There's a lot of different flags that you're thinking about. And so you're like, how do I keep track of all of this? Well, one of times there are cheat sheets online. Like if you'll hear, they'll list you common commands that you need to run. Right? Sometimes I don't remember what CD was, and it'll tell you. Another one. So oftentimes commands that you use, especially ones that are just default, have really in-depth documentation about them. So one thing you can do just on the terminal is say man. Maybe you don't remember what make directory does. Great. So man page is just a help page. Let me click enter. Okay, it loaded. Yeah, so you can see here it's showing all of the description of what the command does and then all of the related flags. So this is very useful to just look up a command really quickly. So you can be like, oh, I wanted an additional printing statement to see if the make directory failed or succeeded. Then you can do the -v flag. Same thing to exit, just press Q. Yeah. Also, I just want to mention that using forums, right, like super users and Stack Overflow, they're super helpful. Because sometimes you get a weird error and you're like, I don't know why that doesn't succeed. Then just looking it up is super nice. And here I just added a command what does this terminal command do? Yeah. And then I think that will mark the end of our the lecture for today. Tomorrow we'll be focusing a little bit more on advanced topics. So like we mentioned, managing packages. We're going to be looking at using commands like tmux, doing background jobs, stuff like that. But yeah, for today, we still have about 45 minutes. What we have is we prepared some practice exercises for you guys. So you can go on using this link here to access the slides. And there's I think about 10 or 15. So you'd be copy this folder, open this file to help you practice, what we talked about today. So we'll stay around. We'll turn off the recording, but we'll stick around and help you guys with this. But you're also free to leave. Yeah.
So are there any questions?